Hey, how's it going, guys? So this is going to be my top 5 stacks for DFS on DraftKings for Week 5 uh, for the Sunday Main Slate. I'm going to be talking about some stacks with high point total games. I'm also going to be talking about some stacks that will provide a lot of leverage over the field for GPP tournaments. So let's go ahead and jump into DraftKings and take a look. So to start us off here, I'm going to go with Trevor Lawrence with the matchup against Houston with the Jacksonville offense. Uh, Trevor Lawrence last week didn't do too well against the tough Philadelphia defense. Only had 10.6 fantasy points last week, but at a $5,600 price point against a pretty weak Houston defense, I believe they're last in the league as far as defense goes. Besides Detroit, I look for Trevor Lawrence to bounce back really well this week with a lot easier matchup. He's been playing pretty well this at the start of this season so far. Been extremely efficient. It's only turned the ball over, it looks like, twice as far as interceptions go. Had a really tough time against Philly, which really didn't have the best conditions, with basically a monsoon for the majority of the game. Another good part about stacking Trevor Lawrence this week is the options with Christian Kirk and Marvin Jones Jr. Um, so Marvin Jones Jr. at $4,200. Then again, last week is kind of a write off with such a tough matchup. Basically, the best team in the NFL with the basically the best team in the NFL, the last unbeaten team against Philly. But again, he's at least garnered 5 targets in games where it's not a monsoon and he's not got a terrible matchup. So again, going up against Houston, I look for him to go back to form here around that 5 to 6 target range. Christian Kirk has really been the highest targeted guy in the first 4 weeks of the season. As you can see, he's definitely Trevor Lawrence's favorite target so far, and they're all relatively cheap. So again, a quarterback at less than $6,000, um, and most of his receivers and options are less than 5,000 as well. Easy to stack, easy to know who you're going to bring him back with Cooks or OJ Howard or or even Nico Collins as well. So I mean, you got a very cheap options there to go ahead and give you some salary relief to build secondary stacks in this matchup. So again, going back to Trevor Lawrence to head that double stack for Week 5. Moving on to my second favorite stack, going into Week 5 for this week. It's going to be a very low owned stack in the New York Jets with Zach Wilson. He's got a matchup against Miami, a pretty tough defense, a defense that's going to be relatively tough to run against with that really good defensive line. Again, he's in his first week back against Pittsburgh, who's also a pretty tough defense. Put up 20.78 fantasy points on 36 pass attempts, 1 touchdown with 2 interceptions. You know, in his first game back, you're definitely going to be expecting some rustiness, getting back into the game flow of things. But one thing that I really like about it is the fact that he's projected to be at 3% ownership. So if he decides to just go off in this game against Miami, playing at home, you're going to have a tremendous amount of leverage over the field. And as you can see, his pass catchers are just as cheap as he is. Garrett Wilson at $5,200. Saw 6 targets last week in his comeback game. Speaking of Zach Wilson, um, averaging 20.5 yards a reception on his lone 2 receptions. A guy that I think whose value skyrockets with Zach Wilson on the field. It's going to be Corey Davis. Caught 5 passes on 6 targets with a touchdown, 18.4 fantasy points. Last season as well, when Zach Wilson was on the field, Corey Davis was um, an awesome fantasy asset in your lineups. Another guy that I think his value skyrockets as well is Braxton Berrios. Tight bond between the two guys, Zach Wilson and Berrios, during the offseason. Didn't see that last week, but whether it's going to be this week or later down the road, assuming that Zach Wilson stays healthy, Braxton Berrios really provides a lot of value at such a cheap price there. The stud of the group here, Elijah Moore, didn't see the target share that we would like to see him at when Joe Flacco was in, but saw 3 receptions on 4 targets. At any point, he can definitely take over a game if the offense can start clicking early on. So again, cheap price points here with Garrett Wilson, Corey Davis, and Elijah Moore. And then to have a bring back player as well, you got plenty of options. As we know for Miami, we got Tyreek Hill if he's able to play with the quad injury. Being that he practiced on Friday, bodes well, but he did kind of show up on an injury report relatively late in the week, so it's something to monitor as we get closer to kickoff. Jalen Waddle is more than likely going to play. I would say more likely than Tyreek Hill, so he would probably be the guy that I would be using as a bring back player in that stack. So if I were building a stack there, Corey Davis, Elijah Moore, and Jalen Waddle, you still have a pretty good salary remaining for your running backs position, your tight end and wide receiver position as well if you want to build a secondary stack. So again, Zach Wilson and the New York Jets stack is going to be something I really want to play heavy this week for GPPs. My third favorite stack for Week 5 is going to be Justin Herbert and the Los Angeles Chargers. So far, he's been doing really well this season, only having one lackluster performance against the Jacksonville Jaguars, whose defense has proven themselves to be pretty legitimate so far this season with 14.58 fantasy points. So Justin Herbert here, with Keenan Allen out, we're looking to Mike Williams as the head of that stack there, and one of very few teams where you can add the running back and Austin Eckler into that stack as well. Again, Keenan Allen being out, Josh Palmer listed as questionable for the matchup against Cleveland. But with back-to-back practices, it looks like he will probably end up playing. So Josh Palmer is definitely in play as long as he doesn't have a inactive status right before kickoff. And then to bring it back, we're looking towards Amari Cooper or David Njoku as some of the guys that are really demanding a lot of targets from Jacoby Brissett, who's been extremely efficient so far this season. Njoku's demanded 10 targets and 7 targets in the last 2 weeks, respectively, with Amari Cooper, who just went off in week 2 and 3 with 20.1 and 26.1. One thing that was pointed out by another content creator was the fact that he's really performing really well at home. So with it being an at-home game, there's something to look at. But going back to the Chargers, 3 main guys that you're looking to play with this stack here is just with Justin Herbert. It's going to be Austin Eckler, Mike Williams, and Josh Palmer. Now, the last 2 stacks I'm going to be talking about are pretty straightforward. Not much explanation needed for them. But to name my 4th one here is going to be the Buffalo Bills with Josh Allen, who's been nothing but short of fantasy MVP of the year, putting up nearly 30 fantasy points in the first 4 weeks of the season, with the exception of last week when both teams were playing in a monsoon, and he still put up 24 fantasy points. One thing that I've noticed this season is the massive production that he's getting with his legs. So Josh Allen in play. One thing to monitor, or one thing to note, is he is massively owned. He's at about a 12% ownership in GPPs, and Steph Diggs is at about he's at about 9% ownership. So if you want to if you kind of want to pivot off that, you can definitely go the Devin Singletary route, pivot off that ownership and get some leverage on the field. But regardless, Josh Allen, with the ceiling that he has, and Gabe Davis and the options that he can go to as well. Dawson Knox is going to be out, so you can go to Sweeney or Morris here to give you some salary relief. Or you can eat some chalk with Stephon Diggs and still go with him as well. And then on the flip side of that, with Kenny Pickett, I would definitely look to George Pickens or Deontay Johnson to round out that bring back spot for that matchup. The last guy to round out my top stacks for Week 5 is going to be Jalen Hurts. Again, not much explanation needed for Jalen Hurts. He's been basically the most dominant fantasy quarterback not named Josh Allen so far this season. Last week was a bit of a dud with the type of conditions they were playing in. But he's basically run for a touchdown, and he's basically run for a touchdown every week so far this season, with the exception of Washington, where he threw for over 300 yards. So the guy's been a monster so far, and he's pretty easy to stack with as well, with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert. You can throw Quez Watkins in there as well as kind of a boom or bust play. But again, with the exception of A.J. Brown, all these guys are relatively affordable. And then on the flip side of that, if you wanted to bring in a bring back player, which is usually how we build lineups, you got Marquise Brown at $7,200. You still got Greg Dortch, who I believe is going to still have a pretty big role, given that Rondale Moore is questionable again. It's going to be more of a game time decision. Greg Dortch, with the return of Rondale Moore, only saw one target. But again, if Rondale Moore is out, definitely plug in Greg Dortch for a heavy workload in place of him. A.J. Green, who's going to be a definite go for tomorrow as well. I'm looking to him to have a pretty decent day. Definitely going to have more than 2 targets coming in to Week 5. So again, relatively easy stack to build and easy players to have as bring back players. You're gonna have to pay a higher premium definitely than the rest of the guys I've mentioned so far, but it's not impossible to build a stack with. So Jalen Hurts to finish out my top stacks for Week 5. All right, guys, so those are my top 5 stacks for Week 5 of the NFL season for DFS on DraftKings. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and drop a comment on who you're going to be playing for stacks this week on DFS on DraftKings. Thank you guys for watching.